Officer Clark finding Mr. Villalpando's car in a parking lot of a closed office complex where a burglar alarm has sounded. With clear, reasonable suspicion, which is necessary to investigate further, Officer Clark attempts to make an investigatory stop.
64, I have a vehicle leaving the scene in Heath's Lane. I'm in pursuit.
Instead of stopping his vehicle, Mr. Villalpando, whose blood alcohol level was later determined to be well over the legal limit, leads Officer Clark on a high-speed chase with speeds up to 89 miles per hour through heavy traffic into the city of Euless, elevating the situation to a felony offense of evading arrest or detention in a vehicle. When Mr. Villalpando finally stops at the very edge of a busy highway, Officer Clark follows well-established procedures for a felony traffic stop that are designed to protect both Officer Clark and Mr. Villalpando.
Let me see your hands! Put your hands out the window!
The procedures are meant to keep Mr. Villalpando in his vehicle with his hands visible to assure he has no weapon until additional officers can arrive to assist in the arrest. Officer Clark's voice is raised at this point so that he can be heard over the traffic noise.
Get your hands out the window! Get your hands out the window!
But he is clearly calm and in control during his radio transmissions.
364, I got him at gunpoint. Get your hands up! Get your hands up!
Mr. Villalpando follows the officer's instructions at first.
Got his hands on his head. I got him at gunpoint. Said he kept trying to reach for something. He's obeying my commands right now.
But then exits the vehicle and begins walking toward Officer Clark, despite repeated emphatic instructions not to do so, and at a time, Officer Clark is pointing his weapon at him.
No! Stand right there!
It is important to note that the verbal exchange between Officer Clark and Mr. Villalpando was in English. Mr. Villalpando clearly responded to some commands in English, and when he spoke, he did so in English. While some have been critical of the officer's use of strong language, we can see in the video he is urgently trying to keep Mr. Villalpando at a safe distance until backup arrives. Strong language only starts after Mr. Villalpando refuses to comply with the officer's clear, lawful instructions.
Back up, mother****! Back up! Get to the back of the car!
But Mr. Villalpando keeps moving toward the officer as vehicles on the roadway are passing close to both of them. We have also heard suggestions that Mr. Villalpando was not a threat because at times his hands are raised, but it would only take seconds for him to change the position of his hands if he comes close enough to attack the officer. Between the time Mr. Villalpando begins walking toward Officer Clark and the time Officer Clark utilizes deadly force, Mr. Villalpando has been told more than 20 times to stop approaching the officer. Officer Clark does not fire his weapon until Mr. Villalpando is close enough that he could physically attack him or try to obtain his weapon.
Shots fired! Shots fired!